If you've ever heard a sudden inner frequency, faint or intense, then I have some news for you. You're already awakened. That frequency you hear, that faint ringing in the background, maybe even those random moments where one ear suddenly lights up with a sharp frequency, that's not just noise, and it's definitely not random. Because here's the truth most people will never realize. If you can hear it, you've already awakened. Some people hear it every day. Some hear it like a soft hum. Others like a sudden flash of sound out of nowhere. But the pattern is always the same. It only starts when something inside you wakes up. And here's the part nobody tells you. Which ear you hear it in actually matters. It has meaning, a very specific meaning. But I can't break that down yet. Not until you understand why it happens in the first place. Just know this, if you've been hearing it, even once, you're already further along than you think, and what you're about to hear next will confirm exactly why. There's a moment every awakened person remembers, the moment they finally admit to themselves, I hear it. Because that's when everything changes. Acknowledging the sound isn't just noticing a noise, it's an inner recognition. It's your mind, catching up to what your energy already knows. And the second you acknowledge it, you connect to something bigger, a quiet collective of people who all share the same hidden signal. A frequency-based recognition that only awakened people can perceive. And once you recognize it, even once, something activates, a shift in awareness that cannot be undone. You stop hearing it as a sound and start feeling it as a presence. You stop questioning it and start realizing what it actually means. Most of the time, you probably hear it on both ears. But when you hear it in only one ear, then it has a deeper meaning. Most people think the ringing just happens, but awakened people eventually realize something deeper. The side it shows up on is part of the message. It's not superstition. It's not wishful thinking. It's pattern recognition at the level of the soul. When the left ear rings, the signal moves inward. It touches the emotional layer, the intuitive layer, the ancestral layer. It's the side that responds when something in your inner world is shifting. Some describe it as a reminder to pay attention to what you're feeling. Others say it arrives when their deeper self is trying to be heard over the noise of daily life. The left side speaks the language of memory, intuition, and internal truth. When the right ear rings, the message is outward. It's guidance, not emotion. It's movement, not reflection. Many people experience right ear frequencies right before a decision, a turning point, or a moment where something in the external world is aligning for them. Some interpret it as future cues. Others feel it as a sharp clarity, almost like an energetic nudge saying, be ready. This isn't fortune-telling, it's not mystical theatrics. It's the way the awakened recognize subtle directional shifts in their awareness. One ear speaks to what's happening inside you, the other speaks to what's beginning outside you. And once you understand that difference, the ringing stops feeling random and starts feeling like what it truly is. Your inner world and the outer world speaking in two different languages, both meant for you. But if you're starting to see these patterns, there's something even stranger you need to know next. Because what happens when the ringing stops says more about you than the sound ever did. Everyone talks about the ringing, but nobody talks about the silence that sometimes follows it. And that silence is not always comforting. In fact, for awakened people, it's usually the opposite. There are moments where the tone you've always heard suddenly fades. Not gradually, completely. It disappears in a way that feels wrong, like something inside you went offline. People describe it as a strange emptiness, a missing sense, an absence that feels heavier than the sound ever did. And that's because the ringing wasn't noise, it was connection. Here's the part most won't want to hear. If you heard it once and now it's gone, it's not a reward, it's a warning. Silence after awakening is rarely peaceful. It's often a sign that you've drifted away from your truth, disconnected from something you once recognized without even trying. The tone doesn't vanish because you're fine. It vanishes because you're losing signal. And the longer the silence lasts, the harder it becomes to reconnect. Think about the moments in your life where you felt out of alignment, disconnected from yourself, going through motions you didn't choose. That's usually when the ringing disappears. The sound returns when you return to yourself. The connection comes back when you do. But here's the real twist. The silence always shows up right before a major shift, and understanding why can change the entire way you see your awakening. There's something people never admit out loud. Once the ringing shows up, it doesn't just disappear. You don't grow out of it, you don't forget it, and you definitely don't go back to the silence you had before. Because the moment you hear that frequency for the first time, something in you has already crossed a line you can't uncross. Awakening doesn't have a reverse button. It's not a phase. It's not a moment you can rewind. It's a shift in perception that permanently changes the way your inner world responds to reality. People who hear the frequency often describe it the same way. It becomes a companion. It might fade, it might fluctuate, it might come at unexpected times, but it never truly leaves, and that's because it's tied directly to your awareness. When your mind expands, when your intuition sharpens, when your sensitivity strengthens, your perception becomes tuned to layers of reality that most people stay completely blind to. And once that sensitivity switches on, it doesn't turn back off just because life goes back to being normal on the outside. You could try to return to your old life, your old habits, your old mindset. Some people try to hide from their awakening, pretend nothing changed, force themselves into routines that once felt comfortable. But even when you do that, the frequency still shows up. It shows up as a reminder, a pulse, a subtle announcement that the person you used to be doesn't fit your awareness anymore. Awakening doesn't ask for permission. Once it happens, it becomes a part of you. The ringing acts like proof that you've stepped into a level of perception that you can't simply unlearn. Proof that your senses have upgraded beyond the point of return. It's the universe telling you already crossed the threshold. Why are you pretending you didn't? And every time that frequency rises, even for a moment, it's like a quiet whisper saying, you're still awake, even if you're trying not to be. But if you think being awakened by the sound is intense, the next part is something hardly anyone talks about, and it changes the entire meaning of why you hear it in the first place. One of the strangest things about hearing the ringing is something people rarely admit. It can make you feel more distant from others. Not because you're pulling away, but because you've started perceiving something they don't. When you hear a frequency most people will never notice, it naturally creates a quiet separation between your reality and theirs. It's like walking through the world with an extra layer of awareness, while everyone else is moving through the surface level. This isn't loneliness in the traditional sense. It's a specific type of spiritual isolation that only appears once you awaken. You begin noticing the gap between the way you experience life and the way others seem to drift through it, conversations start feeling different. Environments feel more intense. People's intentions become easier to read, and the ringing becomes this subtle confirmation that you're no longer moving at the same pace as the rest of the collective. Many awakened people go through this phase where they feel like they've stepped into a world that others around them can't sense, not because they're better than anyone else, but because they're ahead of the signal. You're hearing what others will only start noticing years from now, if ever. And that kind of early awareness often feels isolating at first. Awakening separates you before it elevates you. But this isolation isn't punishment, and it isn't a detour. It's a sign that you're evolving faster than your surroundings. You're tapping into something that requires space for reflection, space for growth, space for clarity, and the ringing becomes a reminder that you're not supposed to go backward to fit in. You're meant to keep moving forward into the version of yourself that actually sees what others ignore. Over time, that feeling of isolation shifts. What once felt like distance becomes a kind of inner strength. You start realizing that the frequency you hear isn't separating you from the world. It's separating you from the parts of the world you were never meant to stay in. And the next thing that happens after this phase is something even more powerful, something that shows you exactly why the ringing chose you in the first place. There's a reason the ringing doesn't always stay at the same intensity. Awakened people consistently report that right before something major shifts in their life, the frequency becomes louder, sharper, or more persistent. And what's fascinating is how often this happens before the mind has any clue that a big moment is approaching. It's almost like your energy field picks up the pressure of an incoming change before your logical brain knows what's going on. For some, the ringing spikes when they're about to move into a completely new chapter, a breakthrough, a decision, an unexpected opportunity, or a realization that changes how they see everything. Others have noticed it right before relationships evolve, end, or reveal truths that were hidden beneath the surface. There are also people who say the ringing intensifies when they're getting closer to walking into a situation that will test their growth, or when life is preparing to challenge them in a way that ultimately moves them forward. But the most intriguing pattern is how the ringing behaves during times of collective tension. Without watching the news, without checking their phone, without being told anything, awakened people often feel something building, something subtle but undeniable. Their awareness reacts, and the ringing gets louder, as if their intuition is connecting the dots faster than their mind can. This intensity isn't random discomfort. It's a signal that your awareness is expanding faster than the world around you. Think of it like a pressure change before a storm. Your inner world senses the atmosphere shifting. The energy gets denser, more charged, and the frequency reflects that buildup. Your intuition doesn't predict events, it feels the vibration of the events before they happen. Some people try to ignore it. They think the spike is just another moment of sensitivity. But the truth is, louder ringing often arrives at the exact intersection where your life is about to diverge, when you're approaching decisions that reshape you, when hidden truths rise to the surface, or when life is about to move you into a path you didn't even know you were meant to walk. And here's where the twist comes in. The ringing doesn't just react to change. Sometimes it initiates it. It can be the inner wake-up blast that prepares you before your life unfolds in a direction you weren't expecting. It's almost like your higher self saying, "Are you awake enough for what's coming next?" So when the ringing grows louder, don't treat it as an inconvenience. Treat it as awareness communicating in a language you finally learned to hear. Because once you feel that shift, something even more profound happens. Your numbness begins to disappear. A lot of people move through life in a state they don't even realize they're in. Emotional autopilot. They react, they repeat, they endure, all without questioning why. There's a muted quality to it, like their internal world has the volume turned down. But awakening flips that switch. And the ringing is one of the strongest indicators that your inner sensitivity has returned after years of being buried under distraction, survival mode, and emotional suppression. Before awakening, life can become mechanical. People stop registering small details. They fail to notice their own intuition nudging them. They override the quiet signals from their body. They settle for a sense of fine that feels hollow but familiar, and they call that normal. But the moment you begin to hear the frequency, something shifts. You start becoming aware of yourself in a way you haven't been in years. Your perception sharpens. Your presence increases. You're not drifting, you're noticing. And the ringing reflects that. It doesn't show up for people who are numb, checked out, or disconnected. It shows up for people who have begun to wake back up to their own consciousness. The sound is a subtle reminder that your internal world is active again, alive again, responsive again. Awakening isn't about seeing more. It's about finally feeling what you used to ignore. With this new sensitivity, you start recognizing the energy behind people's words instead of just the words themselves. You feel shifts in environments, not as paranoia or discomfort, but as awareness that something is off or something is aligning. You notice when your intuition is tugging at you. You notice when your emotions surface instead of staying buried. You notice the changes in your own energy even before you can explain them. You're not becoming hypersensitive, you're returning to your natural state, a state where presence becomes your default rather than something you have to force. Most people don't realize they were numb until the numbness begins to fade. The ringing is one of the first signs that your awareness is coming back online. It's a sound that marks the moment you stop sleepwalking through your days and start experiencing life with clarity instead of habit. And what happens after this sensitivity returns leads to the next phase of awakening, one that changes the way the ringing shows up and what it means for your future. A lot of people assume that if the ringing isn't constant, it's less meaningful. But that idea couldn't be further from the truth. In reality, hearing the frequency only once in a while is a sign that your spiritual evolution is happening in waves, intense, fast, powerful shifts that open your awareness in sudden bursts rather than gradual steps. Think of it this way: the tone doesn't show up to entertain you or fill empty silence. It appears to mark a specific moment in your awakening, a moment where something inside you shifts so sharply that your perception expands for a few seconds. When you hear the tone suddenly, and then it's gone, that's a sign that you just stepped into a higher level of awareness without even realizing it. It's like hitting a spiritual checkpoint, a recognition, a confirmation that something in your consciousness just leveled up. People who hear the ringing only occasionally are often the ones who are moving through huge internal transitions. They're not stagnant, not stuck, not locked into the same emotional frequency every day. Their growth comes in leaps. Their realizations come in flashes. Their breakthroughs come out of nowhere, and the ringing appears to highlight these exact moments. Sometimes it appears during a moment of honesty with yourself. Sometimes it shows up when you cut a cord you've been holding on to. Sometimes it comes right before an intuitive decision, or right after you break a pattern you've been trapped in for years. And because breakthroughs themselves are rare and meaningful, the sound that accompanies them carries that same rarity. You might notice that the ringing appears when you're not overthinking, but when you're fully present, it hits during those rare seconds where your mind stops replaying old stories and steps into clarity. It's in those moments, when your inner world aligns with your truth, that the frequency reveals itself. It's not here to stay in the background. It's here to mark spiritual milestones that you might not even consciously recognize. Some people hear it constantly, but the ones who hear it occasionally are the ones changing the fastest. If you only hear it once in a while, take it as a sign that your awakening is accelerating. You're entering new levels of awareness at a speed that doesn't require constant reminders. And once you understand that, you begin to realize the ringing has a depth to it that goes beyond perception, because sometimes it isn't coming from you at all. There's a perspective almost nobody talks about, even though countless awakened people experience it. What if the frequency isn't just your body reacting, but your guides communicating? Not in words, not in visions, not in symbols, but in vibration, a direct non-verbal language that bypasses logic and goes straight into your awareness. When we talk about guidance, most people imagine signs, coincidences, dreams, or intuitive nudges. But why would guidance be limited to what the conscious mind can interpret? Think about how animals detect frequencies we can't hear, how they respond to energies that don't register to us. Now imagine that the awakened mind is simply more sensitive, tuned to frequencies most people filter out. If your awareness expands, wouldn't you naturally begin to pick up on spiritual communication that operates on frequency, not language? This ringing often arrives at extremely precise moments you need to pay attention, not because your guides are sending instructions, but because they're trying to shift your awareness. They don't want you to look for a sign. They want you to notice the moment you're already in. That's why the ringing doesn't say, "Go left," or "say this." It says something far more powerful: "Be here right now." People report that the ringing appears before a realization they didn't know they needed. It shows up when they're about to ignore their intuition or when they're drifting away from something important. It also shows up when something good is aligning, almost like a subtle announcement that you're stepping onto the right timeline. And just like an animal hears the whistle, meant only for it, the ringing reaches the awakened person without disrupting anyone around them. This frequency bypasses the ego completely. It doesn't go to your thoughts, it goes to your awareness. It's a method of communication designed to avoid confusion, overthinking, or misinterpretation. It's not a command, it's a redirection, a reminder, a presence. Guides don't always speak in words. Sometimes the soul understands a frequency long before the mind does. And once you begin to see it this way, the ringing becomes something far more profound. It stops feeling like a random noise and starts feeling like recognition, like the universe is tapping you lightly on the shoulder, not to scare you, not to overwhelm you, but to remind you that you're not walking this path alone. And the more awakened you become, the more obvious this subtle communication becomes, until one day you realize that what you thought was a sound was actually a conversation you are finally ready to hear. Here's the truth that almost nobody acknowledges. The ringing itself isn't special. What's special is the capacity to perceive it. The frequency is always present, a subtle layer woven into the background of reality, like a quiet current running beneath everything you experience. But the majority of people live in such a constant state of distraction and mental noise that they never even come close to noticing it. Their minds are loud, overstimulated, and scattered. They jump from thought to thought, screen to screen, problem to problem, without ever settling long enough for the deeper layers of perception to rise to the surface. Most people aren't just busy, they're buried. Buried under social media flash stimulation, buried under unresolved stress, buried under habits that numb their sensitivity, buried under identities they didn't choose. Their attention is constantly hijacked by everything outside of them, while the ringing exists entirely inside. And because their inner world is neglected, the frequency never has room to be heard. This is why someone could be inches away from profound awareness and still feel nothing. Because awareness requires stillness, and stillness is something most people have forgotten how to access. When you hear the ringing, it's because your mind isn't operating on the restless frequency the world forces on everyone. You've created a fraction of silence, even if unintentionally. You've allowed your awareness to breathe. And in that rare moment, the subtle becomes undeniable. Think about how hypersensitive children and animals sometimes react to things adults completely miss, not because the adults can't perceive it, but because their attention is trapped elsewhere. Spiritual ringing works the same way. It was never hidden. People just stopped listening. Most individuals are so detached from themselves that even when the ringing does appear, they ignore it, rationalize it, or immediately drown it out. They don't imagine it could mean anything because they've been conditioned to believe the inner world has no value unless it can be measured, explained, or logically categorized. That conditioning kills their sensitivity long before awakening could ever reach them. You, on the other hand, broke through that conditioning, intentionally or not. Something in you refused to stay numb. Something in you was curious enough or aware enough to stop and notice what other people overlook. You're not perceiving something rare, you're perceiving something timeless. The frequency was never silent. Humanity just became too loud to hear it. So when you notice it, when you recognize it, when you allow it to exist instead of dismissing it, that alone separates you from most of the collective. You didn't force yourself to hear it. You simply became quiet enough, aware enough, alive enough to notice a truth that has always been there, waiting for someone whose perception wasn't clogged by the noise of the world. And once you grasp that, the next realization becomes unavoidable. The ringing isn't just something you stumbled into. It's something you attuned for. The ringing feels personal for a reason. It doesn't show up randomly. It appears at very specific moments, turning points, inner conflicts, intuitive breakthroughs, emotional clarity, or crossroads you only understand later. The timing is too precise to ignore. Most people never hear this frequency because they aren't ready to respond to it. Their awareness isn't open enough yet, but you are. Not because you're superior, but because your path awakens earlier and deeper than most. You didn't choose this timing. The timing chose you. The sound works like a quiet calling card from your higher consciousness. It's not a warning, it's not instructions, it's resonance. It speaks in a language you don't translate. You simply recognize it. It bypasses logic and hits you at the level of awareness itself. If you're still watching, I'd like to thank you for your attention. If you enjoyed the content and want to see more, please consider clicking the subscribe button. Your support is very appreciated. Feel free to share your experiences or thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, take care and subscribe for more insightful content.